My name is Zach Arnold. I'm a Hollywood film and television editor, a documentary director, father of two, an American Ninja Warrior in training, and the creator of Optimize Yourself. Whether you're a creative professional, an entrepreneur, a weekend warrior, or even a professional athlete, I strongly believe that it is no longer necessary to sacrifice your health in order to be successful. Throughout my own career, I have battled attention issues, anxiety, burnout, and back in 2005, after almost losing the battle with suicidal depression, I had had enough. I was done barely surviving. I wanted to thrive. Since then, I have obsessively searched for every possible way to optimize my own creative and athletic performance. And now I want to shorten your learning curve so you can forge your own path to greatness without sacrificing your sanity in the process. You ready? Let's get started designing the optimized version of you. Hello and welcome to episode 56 of the Optimize Yourself podcast. Whether you're a first-time listener or a seasoned veteran, I'm grateful to have you here, and I appreciate you prioritizing this time in your day to allow me to inspire you to live just a bit further outside your comfort zone so you can feel empowered to realize your greatest potential. Now, to ensure that you don't miss future episodes, I invite you to subscribe to this podcast in iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, Spotify, or whatever app you prefer, because I have tons of great guests, giveaways, and free training coming your way on a weekly basis. Just visit optimizeyourself.me/subscribe to make sure that you don't miss future episodes and to access our index of past episodes. Whether you do intense creative work every single day, or you do intense athletic training, or if you happen to do both like me, the most overlooked aspect of life is often recovery. If you don't recover, you can't train harder. If you don't recover, you can't focus or solve difficult creative problems, especially if you're dealing with tight deadlines. And if you don't recover, you will eventually burn out. But thanks to the Oura ring, recovery is now as measurable as your weight, your height, or even your daily step count. My guest today is Chuck Hazzard. He is an entrepreneur and an expert when it comes to wearable technology and biohacking, and he is currently the vice president of sales at a company called Oura, which is based in Finland, but it has now taken the United States by storm with its device, the Oura ring. Now, if you're not familiar with the Oura ring, it's probably because you would never recognize that somebody else is even wearing one. And by the way, that's part of its brilliance. Now, it's easy to spot Apple Watches or Fitbits or the countless other trackers that people wear today, but the Oura ring is as inconspicuous as it comes because it essentially looks like a very simple wedding band. That's right, you just wear it on your finger. But despite its design simplicity, there is no question that it is the best sleep tracker on the market today. If you have any interest in measuring and improving the quality of your sleep at a level that's so detailed that your doctor would be envious, and by the way, this is a medical grade device, then you need to listen to this interview. Chuck and I take a deep dive into the sleep quantification rabbit hole, and we discuss the many kinds of medical grade measurements that the Oura ring takes while you're sleeping, including your resting heart rate, your heart rate variability, your respiration rate, your body temperature, and more. But more importantly, we talk about how all of this data is only meaningful if you know how to interpret it and then modify your daily behaviors so you are ultimately better rested and you have recovered enough to take on whatever today's challenge might be. Now, as a quick PS, Chuck was kind enough to offer a coupon code that is worth $75 off your order. And no, that's not a mistake. He's giving you $75 off. But the coupon code is only going to be good until January 1st. So if you have a stocking that needs to be stuffed this upcoming holiday season, whether it's somebody else's or, let's admit it, it's probably your own, you can use the coupon code OPTIMIZE for $75 off your Oura ring. And just as a final disclaimer, I am not an affiliate for Oura ring, and I'm not going to earn a single cent in commissions if you choose to buy one of these with or without the coupon code. I simply believe in this technology, and I want to help you succeed. Now, before we get to our interview, I'd like to thank the company Adobe for not only supporting this podcast and the Optimize Yourself movement, but also for being kind enough to provide me with 4 yearly subscriptions to Adobe Creative Cloud that I can then give to you. Now, for those that might not be aware, Creative Cloud is an essential package of video creation tools such as Premiere, After Effects, and Audition. These are tools that I personally can't live without, whether I'm working in the web, in TV, or on film projects. To win yourself a yearly subscription to this awesome suite of creative tools, all you have to do is leave an honest review for this podcast in iTunes or Apple Podcasts. It is seriously that simple. I'm going to do one drawing per month for October, November, December, and January. To learn more about the great products that Adobe Creative Cloud has to offer, all you have to do is visit optimizeyourself.me/Adobe. And if that isn't enough to get you excited, you can also enter to win the 12-month Pro Plan from my newest sponsor, Frame.io. If you're not familiar with Frame.io, it is an amazing online collaboration tool where you can comment and interact directly with your videos, providing instant feedback rather than constantly going back and forth via endless email chains while you're doing revisions to your videos. And you know how I feel about email and productivity. To learn more about Frame.io, just visit optimizeyourself.me/Frame.io. And for clarification, that's Frame.io with no periods or spaces. And don't forget to leave that podcast review on iTunes to be entered to win. Okay, without further ado, after a brief break to recognize my other sponsors who are literally making this interview possible for you today, my interview with biohacking expert Chuck Hazzard. To access the show notes for this episode, please visit optimizeyourself.me/episode 56. This episode is made possible for you by ErgoDriven, the makers of the TopoMat, my #1 recommendation for anybody who stands at their workstation. The Topo is super comfortable, an awesome conversation starter, and it's also scientifically proven to help you move more throughout the day, which helps reduce discomfort and also increase your focus and productivity. To learn more and get your TopoMat, visit optimizeyourself.me/topo. That's TOPO. This episode is also made possible for you by Sit Tight, my new #1 recommendation if you're searching for a healthier, more ergonomically friendly office chair that turns sitting into an activity that actually improves your health rather than damaging it. Yes, you can actually get fit while you sit. If you've never seen one, just imagine the most comfortable bar stool on the planet on top of a Bosu ball. Just trust me, it's awesome. If you want to learn more about how the Sit Tight can provide fitness for your body, focus for your mind, and fun for your spirit, just visit optimizeyourself.me/sit-tight and use the coupon code OPTIMIZE for 10% off your order. I'm here today with Chuck Hazzard, who is the VP of Sales at Oura. He's also an avid trail runner, and he is the creator of the Human Optimization Project. So it's probably no mystery why I'm having you on the Optimize Yourself podcast. So Chuck, it is a pleasure to have you here today.
It's great to be here, Zach. Thank you.
Well, this is going to be exciting for me because I am a bit of a wearables junkie. I love quantification. I love numbers. I love having the awareness of my behaviors and seeing how I can compare them over time and knowing that at any moment I can go back into my Fitbit account from March of 2014 and see how much I was walking that day versus yesterday. So to me, education and awareness is so super important. And that's why I have you on the show today. But specifically, the reason that I have you on the show is to talk about something that's pretty awesome, which is the Oura Ring. So just talk to me a little bit briefly so people can understand who you are, what your background is, and what this technology is that you and I are going to really dive deep into today.
Yeah, so we're kind of kindred spirits. I've been a I guess you'd call a biohacker since the mid-'80s and have tested almost every wearable that's ever been brought to the market, and can continue to do that because I'm very fascinated by what other companies are doing besides Oura. My background is sort of smattered. I've done a little bit of everything from driving forklifts to being a software developer to a practicing attorney, heart math coach, and helping a bunch of startups, sort of business mentor. And so that's it in a nutshell.
So what is it besides being just kind of a biohacking junkie and being into all this stuff, what is your actual background when it comes to the tech side of wearables? Because you and I have exchanged a few emails and you clearly know your terminology and you know the tech behind this stuff. It's like for me, I can say, well, this is what Fitbit does or this is what Oura does or whatever. But if somebody asked me how, I'd be like, I don't know.
Yeah, well, so I mean, I guess a combination of having been a software developer, so I understand that side of the equation. And then also having spent a lot of time studying electrical engineering and then working with in the early start off phase of some of the common wearables of today, like Garmin on the ground floor. So I was able to appreciate some of the challenges and what they were trying to accomplish. And then on top of that, I also spend quite a bit of my day combing through research on physiology, heart rate variability, sleep, all kinds of different things. So, and again, as a tester of, a lot of different wearables that I swap out, every week, I have a good understanding of what people are trying to accomplish in general.
Well, what I want to do is really dive into some of the terminology so people understand what the Oura Ring specifically does. And am I saying it right? Is it Oura or Aura or like what's the
Here in the U.S.? I mean, I probably be slapped by some of my peers at the company. I call it Oura. I think the pronunciation varies if you're Finnish versus the U.S.
Mhm.
So I can't say for sure. Even after working with them since November 2016, it's still a challenge.
Well, and I'm glad you brought that up actually, because I wanted to make sure that people listening understood that this is actually a product that was developed and is headquartered in Finland, which is, I think the reason I bring that up is because I've actually had a couple of other podcasts for other products that didn't originate in the US, one of them being the human charger, which I'm a big fan of
Yes.
as well.
Yeah, and I can tell you a little bit about that too. But yeah, it's interesting. There must be something in the water.
Right? That's what I was thinking. Like, what is it with these Finnish people coming up with all these really amazing wearables? Like, what's
Yeah. So the university where our headquarters are in, I think it's pronounced Oulu, uh, is really, really strong in physiology degrees. And yeah, so the a lot of people don't realize this, but just in, the sort of the central northern part of Finland, you've got, Polar was started there, Bedit, EM-Fit-QS, which is another bed-based system. The human charger was created by one of the top scientists at Polar for many years. His peer at Polar works for Oura now. And so they were sort of did a lot of the, development of the analytics for Polar over the years and did some really incredible stuff starting way back. I mean, they were the early people studying heart rate variability and how that could be used to gauge the performance and recovery of athletes.
Well, and that's definitely an area that I want to go into. But before we dive into heart rate variability and all the really intricacies of how the Oura works or even how other wearables work, where I want to start is my guess is most of the people listening probably are not terribly familiar with this device. So if I were coming to you just saying, hey, I heard this thing about, I guess it's called an Oura Ring. Like, what is it? I don't understand it. What does it do for me?
Yeah, so I mean, a lot of people, we go to conferences ask that very question, and they have a hard time believing that we can do what we can with a ring in a ring format. But what I usually tell them in a nutshell, I mean, most wearables are trying to measure things off the top of your wrist. It's convenient. Piece parts to build the things are fairly cheap, off the shelf products, but it's not a good place to measure anything. We chose to measure off the base of your finger because you happen to have two arteries that run at the base of your finger, which deliver all the blood to your fingers. So it's a very good place to get rich data off the human body. And so what we do is we have two infrared sensors. Infrared is invisible light. It's high. I always get this wrong. It's probably a higher frequency than red light, but it's in the invisible spectrum of light. We use that spectrum because you can actually go deep through skin and bone to, not that you're collecting a lot of stuff off the bones, but anyway, you can get really rich biometrics off that signal. And we sample at 250 times a second off those sensors. Nobody in the wearable industry comes even close to that. And we're not doing that to be show offs. We do that because that happens to be sort of the bottom of the sampling rate that allows you to get truly clinical grade measurements for heart rate variability, and respiratory rate. Then we also have a temperature sensor. While you're sleeping, your skin and core temperature are the same. It's only time during a 24-hour cycle. And so that allows us to measure thermometer accuracy temperatures from the human body while you're sleeping. And we sample once per minute on that. And then we have motion sensors, an accelerometer and gyro that sample at 50 times a second. So we take all of that technology, we use it to accurately determine when you fell asleep, what happened when you were sleeping, and when you woke up. So we give you all the detailed sleep tracking of stages. We also measure your heart rate and heart rate variability throughout the night. We measure your temperature throughout the night. We measure how restless you are or aren't, how tranquil. We then give you a recovery score, based on are you recovered from the prior day's stresses. And then we use the motion sensors to track your activity during the day. Now, the other thing we do, a little different than most 99.9% of the wearables, and some of them, we'll get there eventually, is we create a single score for 3 areas that I just briefly went over. So there's a score 0 to 100 for sleep. There's one for recovery, we call readiness, and another one for activity. And so if you're not really into all the gory details of what we're tracking, if you just look at those numbers, you can get a good sense of, did I sleep well? Did I recover well? Am I getting a good balance of activity during the day? And you can think of it as, so the circadian rhythm is, what you do during the day determines how well you'll sleep that night, and how well you sleep that night will determine how recovered you are and what you're capable of doing the next day. And it's like a circle, right?
Well, I'm glad that you kind of broke this down, because that's exactly the direction that I wanted to go talking about the ring, is these 3 different areas. And it doesn't seem that there's any disagreement amongst the entire wearables industry that you guys have blown everybody else out of the water when it comes to sleep tracking. I mean, I've done sleep tracking with multiple other wearables, and I've really spent the last 2 or 3 years trying to learn as much as I can about how to get better sleep, mostly because I do very intense creative work for long hours. And I found that if I wasn't taking care of my sleep, I couldn't generate ideas, and I was dealing with brain fog, and sleep really was the one thing that I had to focus on. So I'm pretty familiar with like how the Fitbit does it and the different sleep stages. But it wasn't until I put on the Oura ring and slept with it for a few nights that I said, oh my God, there's so much more data that's available to help me understand my sleep patterns. I thought I was sleeping pretty well. And then I put this thing on. I'm like, whoa, I've got a lot of work to do here. So let's just start kind of at the fundamental first stage. And you'd kind of broken down some of the different areas. But it's using the accelerometer to track like the different stages of sleep as far as if I'm moving too much, or like how does that work? Because with other wearables, like if you're using your iPhone and the Sleep Cycle app or the Fitbit, it's mostly based on like, is the bed moving and is there movement? So how do you guys track how restless or not restless I am?
Let me start out with there's sort of 2 components of everything that has to do with sleep from the ring standpoint. So the first thing is identifying if somebody is actually in bed and is committed to falling asleep. And so what we use for that part of it is the motion sensors in temperature. Okay, because we can already see, one, if you're not moving a lot, and your temperature is starting to trend in the direction of somebody that's actually going to sleep, we can figure out very accurately when you fell asleep. I don't know exactly how Fitbit and other people do that. They might use motion sensors only. They may be looking at heart rate, but heart rate could be a little dangerous, because even if you're just sitting, your heart rate can get pretty low depending on the person.
Well, and there have been times too, not to interrupt you, but there were many times where my Fitbit said that I went to sleep at 8:30 at night, but that's just when I took an hour to watch some TV before I went to bed. So it would almost say like I had a nap from 8:30 to 9:30, and then I went to bed at 10. I'm like, it's not really terribly accurate. But I've never had that problem with the Oura ring.
Yeah, is a small subset of people who they're they could be reading in bed or watching a movie on the couch, and their heart rates their temperatures are already starting to change. So, but these are like outliers. But we do have some users that have reported it saying they went to sleep when they really weren't asleep, and we're continually work to refine our algorithms to capture, the outliers. And it's a challenge because when you're designing a wearable, you can think of it as a bell curve. You're trying to, design for sort of the sweet spot of the bell curve, and you're always going to have outliers on both sides, and it's not always possible to capture all those outliers.
One of the things that I really want to make sure that I'm emphasizing is the having tracked my sleep for years. This really picks up, like you said, almost to the minute when I'm actually in bed. So that's been a huge differentiator for me, because I think one of the false assumptions that I was working under is the amount of total bedtime versus total sleep time. I was really looking at the total bedtime more than anything and saying, well, my Fitbit thinks that I went to bed at 9:30 or 10. And for anybody listening, yes, I'm 100 years old and I go to bed before 10 p.m. But that's because I also wake up early and I train really hard, and sleep is the most vital thing on the planet to me. So I protect sleep like Fort Knox.
Right.
But I was going under the assumption that, I'm getting over 7 hours of sleep every single night, and that's great. And then all of a sudden I started to see the total sleep time versus bedtime. I was like, whoa, this is way different than I thought. And I had to start making changes to my evening routine, my habits. And that was a big shift for me. So talk a little bit about what is sleep time versus bedtime.
Yeah, well, I mean, sleep time is what it means is if somebody, you could have the motion sensor being activated, right? But your temperature could be deviating. So it looks like you're at least intending to go to sleep. And likewise, in the morning, you're moving around enough that we can tell you're awake, but you actually haven't gotten out of bed. And so the total time in bed is when you go to actually physically get in bed to the time when you get out of bed. Sleep time is when we determine you have actually fallen asleep. And part of that we show in the app and on the cloud is sleep latency, which is the time between when you physically went to bed and when you fell asleep. So that's the difference basically, is total time physically in bed versus time asleep while you're in bed.
Yeah. And to me, that really was a huge wake up call for me, where I was counting so much on just this generalized number of, you've been in bed for this long. And I would get the little green star every day and feel good about myself. But then you guys really made me realize I suck at sleep, which is good. That's why I got it.
Right. Because the other thing you see, I mean, a lot of people think because they're in bed a long time, but they still feel like crap. Then they get something like the Oura and they can track sleep accurately, or they go to a sleep study, and it becomes very apparent that they're one of these people that they just like wake up all the time during the night because they're stressed or whatever, and they just aren't sleeping well. They're getting just like little pockets of sleep throughout the night, but they're never getting deep sleep.
Yeah. And I was the kind of person that would wake up and I wouldn't remember being awake at all during the night. So I would fall asleep at around 9:30 or 10, wake up at maybe 5:30, 6:30 in the morning, and be like, oh, you know what? I don't remember waking up. Therefore, I must have had a good night of sleep. But then it takes me 2 or 3 hours just to get going. And I'm like, but I got a full night of sleep, and I couldn't really understand why. But what I loved about this, and I'm going to just basically read this right off of the app, because I really thought that when I got the Fitbit Blaze and it actually broke down the sleep stages, I was like, wow, that's pretty awesome. But then I got this and I realized that is like light years behind what you guys have. So when I read down the list in the app of all the things I get from a single night of sleep, it's total bedtime, it's total sleep time, there's efficiency, there's also tranquility, which is the number of times that I wake up or don't wake up. Then you break it down versus REM sleep and deep sleep to the minute. And there's also latency, which you talked about already, which is how long it takes me to fall asleep, but then also timing, because you can have, and you can explain this in further detail, but from what I've learned about sleep is that you can pretty much have the same environment and the same behaviors. But if you're usually going to sleep between 10 and 6, and now all of a sudden you go to sleep between 1 and 9, that's going to change your circadian rhythm. And that's what I'm assuming that the timing function is.
Well, yeah. So for most people, no matter, and we can talk about circadian chronotypes and circadian rhythms, but the timing has to do with people, unless you're a shift worker, the midpoint of your sleep should be between midnight and 2 a.m. And that's what the timing is about. The other thing you mentioned, efficiency, is of the time you were sleeping, how much of it were you actually asleep? So that's sort of another spin on how tranquil your sleep was.
Well, and another question that I have along those lines, and we don't have to go, deep into the science or the biology of this, but just for me personally, just knowing that I have an expert on the call with me, I'm having a hard time still getting enough deep sleep. REM sleep, I knock it out of the park. But deep sleep, I'm still not getting quite enough. So, what is the difference between those two for those that might not know? And what could I be doing to get more deep sleep?
Right. So, from a scientific standpoint, and this is a little different than marketing by wearables, and is they really categorize sleep as REM sleep and then non-REM sleep. The non-REM has been further divided into deep and light sleep. Deep sleep is defined as any non-REM sleep that has at least 20% of shortwave sleep. And so you could take that and say, well, maybe all of light sleep potentially has some shortwave sleep. So one thing I tell people is don't get too caught up in how much deep sleep you have. We're still learning a lot about, what happens to the human body while we sleep. It's evident that, we need it. It's good for us. A lot of cool things happen. But as far as deep sleep, I mean, the key point, I guess, would be a question is how can I get more? Deep sleep tends to occur mostly in the first half of your sleep. So anything that's going to rev you up right before you go to bed will potentially, cause you to end up with less deep sleep. So some of the main things is going back to chronotype. We in the app you've probably already seen because you've had the ring long enough. We provide guidance on when you should go to bed, and this is based on looking back at your past history. And this is part of our first stab at circadian rhythms, is determining when you got the highest sleep scores based on when you went to bed. So we can then give you guidance for you individually on the window when you should go to bed. Because if you have a mismatch in when you go to bed typically, or even on a given night, in your chronotype, you will definitely not have the structure of sleep that you really need. So in other words, you might not have any deep sleep because you're going to bed too late for your chronotype. So by example, say you should be a person like me that's supposed to go to bed between 8:30 and 9:15, pretty early. If I stayed up till midnight or 1 p.m., I'm definitely not going to feel good the next day. I'm not going to get any deep sleep, and I'll probably have a very restless night. Other things, late meals, especially if they're rich, can rev up your heart rate, which you won't get much deep sleep because of that. Blue light exposure, both housing lights, LEDs, compact fluorescents, computer screens, any electronics, TVs. Reading email in bed is a no-no, especially if it's from your boss. Certain movies, if they get you too jazzed up, any of those things can raise your heart rate, which lowers your heart rate variability and will basically prevent you from getting into the right physiological state that you can achieve deep sleep.
Well, one of the really cool things that I want to bring up, just to emphasize again, that it's been such a game changer for me with sleep, like you said, is the fact that it's not just pulling data saying this is when people should sleep or this is how long people should sleep. It looks at your data and says, this is when you need to go to bed. This is how long you need to sleep. And that's something that you do not get from any other wearable that I'm aware of, at least, that's actually getting an idea of who you are as a person individually, and then changing the information to your own type, which, like with Fitbit, at best, you're going to get the little graph that's like you had this much REM and this much deep sleep or whatever, but it's not changing over time. It's just giving you the same data based on their tables.
Right. And that's the thing where our goal is to help people become, the better versions of themselves. And so one of the missing things, we have that we're still working on is learning more about the individual, the user of the ring. So if you played around the app, the little plus sign on the bottom, you can add notes and tags. And so once people start using notes and tags, we can then take that information about them, look back at their data, and help them find ways that they can improve sleep, improve recovery, and improve, how they function during the day.
Well, and the fact that you bring up recovery is perfect because that's exactly where I wanted to transition to next. And that's this readiness score. And I think before diving too deep into readiness, what I want to talk about a little bit, and I've done an entire podcast about HRV in the past with Rhonda Collier, who I'm assuming you probably
Yes, I know her very well.
I'm sure you do. And she's great. So she and I talked about the foundations of what HRV really means, or heart rate variability. So I'll put a link in the show notes if somebody wants a super deep dive for an hour all about how this technology works. But just kind of give people a brief 2 to 3 minute synopsis of what HRV is and why it's important, especially if you're trying to recover either from stress or from strenuous exercise.
I mean, a lot of people are not familiar with heart rate variability, and they falsely believe that the human heart beats like a metronome, which it doesn't. In other words, it doesn't change. The timing between each heartbeat is exactly the same to the millisecond every time. That is not true. Your heart, if you're healthy, the more it varies between beats, the timing between beats, the more healthy your heart is. And so that's what's being measured here. And the way we measure, the same way that Sweetwater Health does, Rhonda's company, is we use RMSSD. People do not need to know what that means, but we sample it 250 times a second. We take all those samples, we run them over 5 minutes, and determine what your heart rate variability is for that 5 minute period. So if somebody sleeps for, let's say, 8 hours, that would be 96 distinct HRV samples that we then, we give the average of, the max of, and we show a graph of in both the app and on the cloud. Now, one of the biggest uses for heart rate variability is to determine the level of stress of an individual. The higher the HRV number is, that shows that somebody is more what's called parasympathetic, which is rest and relaxation. If it's lower, it shows that you're stressed, which means the fight or flight. To explain this in sort of lay people terms, a high stress situation for us from a biological standpoint is you're walking through the jungle and a tiger attacks you, which happened to our ancestors. And so your respiration rate rises, your heart rate rises, your blood flow increases to get your muscles pumped up with energy so you can run away from the lion. But after you get away from the lion, you should get back into a parasympathetic place where your heart rate slows, respiration rate slows. But the problem in today's society is we have social media, we work long hours, we have jobs that are stressful, we have toxins in our environment that cause stress. So people are walking around just chronically stressed now. They're always in fight or flight mode, which is not good. And so one of the things that the Oura can help you do as far as the recovery, based on our HRV that we measure every night, is we can show people that you can make some lifestyle changes and it will be reflected in your heart rate variability, and included that then your readiness score.
Well, and one of the really cool things about HRV that I've discovered, having measured it almost every morning for years, is that it's an amazing predictor of when you're going to get sick. So I've actually known before I'm getting sick, just because of my HRV, like, whoa, my HRV dropped 35 points. That's weird because I feel fine. And then 12 hours or 24 hours later, I come down with a cold. And I'm like, okay, that's just creepy because my body knows before I do.
Yes, and I've seen this personally in a lot of employees and users of the Oura Ring, because we also have the temperature sensor. I've seen my temperature rising in the app, get yellow, like 2 or 3 days before I've come down with like the flu.
Well, and just to exhibit this specific week, I traveled on Monday and Tuesday. I did like this quick 24-hour round trip flight from the West Coast to the East Coast. And when I landed, I'm like, oh, I don't feel too bad. And then on Wednesday, I felt pretty good, but my heart rate had basically dropped in half. So if I'm looking at this week's scores, so from Saturday to Tuesday, it was 84, 83, 84, 80. So I'm pretty consistently in the low to mid 80s with my HRV, which isn't perfect, but it's fairly good from my understanding. And then on Wednesday, it's 49. And then I woke up on Thursday, which is yesterday because we're recording this on a Friday. So I woke up on Thursday morning and I thought I had been hit by a truck. and I could barely function all day long. I couldn't write. I couldn't get any work done. I think I got like 2 or 3 thousand steps. I basically felt like I had the 24-hour flu. And then I woke up this morning with a 73. I'm like, oh, I feel pretty good again. But the point being, the HRV knew it was coming before I did. So when I saw that, I'm like, oh, something's coming on, which to me is just really cool that I can do that. So one thing that I want to ask about HRV is because I've been doing it for, I think it's been at least 4 years. I've always done it the way that Rhonda recommends, where you wake up and it's the first thing you do in the morning before you're really active at all. But from my understanding, I was just getting 1 5-minute sample. And the numbers that I was getting were different than the ones I was getting with the Oura. So you're saying you're doing that sample continuously the entire night.
Right. And the reason, one of the reasons for doing it at night is that you remove any of the confounding variables. So when you take, and I, like you, I've taken samples. I think, crashed Sweetwater Health servers because I wore a chest strap for several days, just dumping data into their server. But when you take even if you do it, you wake up, you roll over, grab the heart strap or some other gizmo, take the measurement, the kids are already awake, so you hear them, you hear pots clanging, dog whining to go out, you're starting to think about work. Or in my case, I can consciously or subconsciously, I want a high score. I'll drive my HRV higher because I'm thinking about it and I want it so badly. I subconsciously change my breathing and achieve a higher score than I might have otherwise. So taking the morning, if you're trending it you take it the same time of day over time, the trends could be interesting. But if you take it at night, the trends are even more interesting because I believe it's a more accurate assessment of where you are, your state.
Yeah. And the reason that that's been so important to me specifically is that I decided this year that I was going to go from being somewhat sedentary, somebody that, made sure that I went hiking once a week and tried to get my 10,000 steps. But it was pretty much, I work in front of a computer for a living. So I was trying to stay healthy, so to speak, but I wasn't athletic. And then at the beginning of this year, I said, you know what? I want to do something stupid. I want to train for American Ninja Warrior.
There you go.
Just short of 40 years old, got 2 kids, got a full-time job. You know what? I'm going to become an American Ninja Warrior. And it was a dramatic shift in my lifestyle and the volume of activity that I was doing, the intensity levels of the activity that I was doing. And I got to the point over, I don't know, probably the first 4 to 5 months where I was just completely overtraining and I really wasn't able to monitor myself very well. And I have a very type A personality and push through things as much as I can. And measuring my HRV once in the morning just wasn't cutting it because it would be, oh, my HRV is in the 60s. All right, well, if it's in the 60s, I can probably still push today. But once I started getting my readiness score in the Oura Ring, that was a game changer because there are just so many different levels of readiness. So talk to me a little bit, not just about HRV, but the whole readiness section of the tracking app, because this has really helped me understand how to modify my training volume to my body and my abilities.
Yeah. So the way we kind of look at the readiness score as the one number of are you recovered or not is sort of akin to the charge on your mobile phone. So if your cell phone it only has like a 50% battery charge and you have no time to charge it before you're heading out to a meeting and you're going to be at meetings all day, you're not going to feel too good about that because if you rely on it, it's going to be dead by lunchtime. And so it's similar with the human body. So it's a very comprehensive number. So instead of just looking at heart rate variability, for instance, so what makes up the readiness score is we look at how restorative your sleep was, and which is huge because that's when you recover. So that goes into the calculation. We look at your lowest resting heart rate, not only how low it got versus prior days and trends, but also the timing during the night. So if your lowest resting heart rate happens in the second half of your sleep, that's evidence you're revved up by one of the many things I mentioned earlier: late meal, late exercise, blue screen, whatever, alcohol. So you want to have your lowest resting heart rate should be in the beginning of the night, because if you are revved up, you're not going to get as much deep sleep. We also look at heart rate variability. We look at your temperature. Is it deviating beyond a certain amount? If it is, you could either be overtrained or sick. coming down with something. And we look at some other things too, but those are sort of the big things that go into that number.
Well, one of the biggest struggles that I've had with my training that was just it wasn't something I ever thought was going to be a problem in my life was because I train so much, I'm always hot, always. And I never
Right.
had problems going to sleep in the past, but I could not fall asleep because I was always ridiculously hot. And I'm now experimenting with like the chili pad and all these other different options that you have for lowering your body temperature. But even before I started using that technology, the Oura Ring told me that that was the problem. And I never had that measured with any device before. And it was saying, your body temperature is at 0.4 or 0.8 degrees above whatever it should be. Like, no kidding, it is. That's why I can't sleep. But it was cool to me because I actually had a device that was confirming it, because my wife was just like, why are you up all the time? Like, what's going on? It's like, because I'm always hot. I can't get cool. But then this device was tracking that and also telling me how ready I was the next day or not ready because I was always hot.
Right. And that's a good point, though. I mean, people, for getting the highest quality sleep, you should sleep in an environment which is actually 65 to 68 degrees Fahrenheit. And if you don't have air conditioning, a chili pad, and the upcoming product the same company is releasing calling the Oura is definitely a good solution for that.
Well, and it certainly doesn't help that I live in Los Angeles in Woodland Hills in summer, where it's been continuously at least 100 degrees. And it costs you basically an extra mortgage payment just to run your air conditioner 24/7. So
that's right.
Yeah,
that's right.
So I never have a room at 68 degrees. Best case is low to mid 70s just because I'm cheap.
Right.
Talk to me a little bit more about resting heart rate at night, because this was something that I'd never tracked before and I found really interesting, because I've always tracked my heartbeat in the morning when I woke up like I did with the HRV, and was using that as just some indicator of just my general health, my general cardiovascular health. And I noticed that as I was doing more training, that number was going down. So I always thought, well, hey, if I can get my resting heart rate in the low to mid 60s, I feel like I'm in fairly good shape for my age. And then all of a sudden I was noticing that my resting heart rate at night was like 40 or 41. So talk to me a little bit about what a number would be for somebody that's either just, general decent health versus an athlete. Like, because I know that this is kind of a point of pride with people like Lance Armstrong or Ben Greenfield, where they talk about their resting heart rate being in their 30s. So talk to me a little bit how resting heart rate corresponds to cardiovascular health.
Right. So having an elevated heart rate all the time is not a good sign. I mean, that's why a lot of the wrist-based wearables now, like the Apple Watch, Garmin's doing it, I think Fitbit too, where they have a feature you can set like a trigger heart rate during the day. So if if your activity can't otherwise explain it, they set up an alarm because you could be having a cardiac event. So that's the example of where the higher heart rate is a symbol, definitely a sign that something bad could possibly be happening, like a cardiac event. The same thing can happen on the low end if, the new Apple Watch was just announced, the Apple Watch 4, and they've also now got an alarm on the low end. So if you chronically have a low heart rate, that I'm not sure exactly what sort of, if that's AFib or some other cardiac issue, but too low a heart rate, if it's otherwise not explained, could be bad. In the middle, for just normal people, having a resting heart between, probably 45 and 60 is probably reasonable. As you just pointed out, some high-end athletes, can be down in the 30s. That's not common, but, they can get that low. I'm a fairly active endurance runner, and, I think on average, I usually don't get much lower than 45 or 46.
Well, speaking of endurance running and activity, that's where I want to transition to next. Because when it comes to sleep and readiness, I knew the basics of most of that information. And I knew that the Oura Ring was basically going to take me to the next level beyond what a Fitbit does or what HRV measurement might do with an HRV app. But when it comes to activity in the Oura Ring, I'm still a little, not necessarily confused, but I'm of the mindset where I wear something on my wrist, it tracks my steps. And I'm OCD enough that I've actually walked for half an hour and counted every single step and looked at my Fitbit and said, how accurate is this? because I've also put my cell phone in my pocket, and I've done the same thing and realized that, putting a phone in your pocket, not terribly accurate when it comes to step tracking. On the wrist, it was really, really close. The problem with the wrist is that I have a tendency to be very animated when I speak. So whenever I do public speaking or I'm recording a video, my step count shoots through the roof. And then I had sent you an email just saying, listen, I've compared the step count on the Ring compared to the step count on my Fitbit, and they were pretty different. So talk to me a little bit about how you're doing step tracking and activity tracking.
Right. So first, one thing right off the top is we do not allow people to calibrate our motion sensors. So if you're looking at step counts, like just normal walking, that's where, like with a Fitbit, you're able to calibrate it over time. Garmin does the same thing. We aren't really measuring steps in the traditional way that most wearables do. We are using the same kinds of motion sensors, but what we do to sort of calibrate the motion sensors is we actually used high-speed cameras and these carbon exchange devices people wear, like a mask people wear, and we try and figure out how many metabolic equivalents somebody burns while they're moving, just all kinds of movement. And walking is one of those. And so we're more interested in tracking how many metabolic equivalents or calories you're burning over time during the day. And I believe we're doing that is better than anybody. But when it comes to steps, I mean, there's a sort of a discrepancy. We show steps because Fitbit sort of dictated everybody needs to show steps. I wish we didn't have to do that. I think people would do better off by just focusing on, are they active or not, and how active are they? And that's something we show in the app. Does that make sense?
It does. So then basically you're saying that you have the step count just because everybody kind of expects it. But if I were to go out and walk 1,000 steps and come back, it might not say exactly 1,000 steps. But on the flip side, for example, when I'm podcasting right now, I'm standing up, my hands are flailing all over the place. I'm very energetic. I'm going to have 0.0 steps over the hour. You're saying that it might give me like an extra 2,000 or 3,000 steps because it's the equivalent of what I would burn if I walked 2,000 or 3,000 steps. Is that about right?
Yeah, that certainly could happen if you wave your arms enough it could be mistaken as walking. So you could get steps from there. We try to rule out certain common type motions so they're not counted as steps. But certainly, in some wearables are better at this than others. There are other things that can increase steps. People, using a push mower to mow their lawn. The vibration of a lawnmower is right there with 50 hertz. So you can rack up a huge number of steps on the Oura Ring by mowing your lawn. So it's, again, it's imperfect in that respect. But I think what, people need to realize is that the key to health is moving throughout the day. It's not necessarily, how intense your running or your bike cycling was or your gym workout. They have shown there's benefit to those, but it's the overall movement during the day that historically made us healthy individuals.
Yeah, and that's something that I've been preaching for years. So anybody that has listened to this regularly is like, oh yeah, we've been hearing this every single week, every episode. I even built an entire online learning program called Move Yourself that just helps people move throughout the day, regardless of how much they exercise or they train, because you can train for 90 minutes a morning and then sit for 12 hours a day, and you're going to be just as about unhealthy as somebody that doesn't do that exercise. So it's going to make you stronger and maybe improve your cardiovascular system to a certain extent. But just as far as general health and longevity, like you said, you just have to continually move throughout the day and not be stagnant.
Right. And a couple of things I'd like to, kind of elaborate on this is another thing is, Fitbit started the whole 10,000 steps a day. And there really isn't any science behind that, meaning someone's going to be healthy if you hit that number or not. There was one quote unquote study in Japan that looked at that, but that was it. And Fitbit, again, became so huge, they created sort of a standard around that. The other standard is 150 active minutes a week, and that's the U.S. government has put that one forward, and so everybody is building that into their wearables now. What we've done like on a day-to-day basis that's different than anybody else is we give a calorie goal of how active you should be. And that goal changes day to day based on how recovered you are, which is pretty cool. So if you have a day when you've got an elevated temperature, you slept crappy, your HRV was in the tank, your heart rate was really high, all these things, you're going to have probably a calorie goal of 150 calories of active calories, which is not very many. So you might just want to go for a short walk with the dog that day. If you have a super recovery, your goal might be, 650 active calories. So that changes day to day based on your recovery.
Yeah, and that's something that I found tremendously beneficial. So I'm just in the app again, and I'm going to read through just the stats for this week. Where today my activity goal was 500, and it's 10:30 in the morning here, and I've already reached 514 because I went to the gym this morning, but I'm also moving, I'm active. But then if we go back to that conversation we had about that low HRV reading, just the day before, my activity goal was 300.
Yep.
And that's not something that you get on any of the other wearables because it asks you, what is your goal for the day? But this is telling me what my goal should be based on my actual makeup and my data, which to me is tremendously more beneficial.
Right. And one thing we're going to be working on as a future release is allowing people to specify in their profile under the settings sort of what type, sort of what their goals are just in general in life. Are you an elite athlete, super competitive, versus the other extreme? You might have some medical issues or you're handicapped, so that calorie goal can be adjusted appropriately. So if you're an elite athlete, like for today, instead of having 600, and let's say you were, one of the top competitors on Ninja Warrior, that goal might have been 2,000. Or we might say for you, because you're such an elite athlete, we'll give you the option to say, don't even give me a goal. Show me how I'm doing towards calorie, activity during the day, but don't actually give me a goal because I don't really care.
Sure. Yeah. And that definitely makes sense. And as long as we're still talking about activity, the next thing that I wanted to talk about, which for me is tremendously important, and it's what I'm really trying to do is get the minimum amount of wearables possible. Because, for example, like right now, and part of this is because I'm testing, but I'm wearing an Oura ring, I'm wearing a Fitbit Blaze. And when I was working out this morning, I had a heart rate monitor on. So I had 4 different wearables trying to compare all this different information, which I don't advocate anybody doing.
Right.
The point being, what I really want is just one wearable that rules them all.
Right.
I just want to have one thing on.
Yeah.
And if I'm somebody that doesn't care about step count or reaching my 10,000, the one thing that was really kind of bugging me, just because I'm OCD about the details, was that with the ring, I didn't seem to get an accurate step count. But now that I understand the way that it's interpreted, I don't really care about the step count. I care much more about the energy that I'm expending during the day. So if that means that I'm on an assault bike and it's giving me an equivalent number of steps, or whatever the activity might be, that's actually more useful to me.
Yeah.
But you guys have recently added the option to add activities as well. And I want you to help me interpret this a little bit. But on other programs, like for example, a Fitbit, when you say you can add an exercise, so you hit the plus button, you say, I went and did my CrossFit class, and then you kind of have to estimate the amount of calories. All I'm doing on this one is I'm giving it a time span. And I noticed that all of a sudden, all of these like bars are showing me the different levels of intensity. Is that based on the data and the heart rate that it's already getting and it's calculating all that information? Because I don't have to enter anything but the time frame.
No, actually, that's not the case. So if you manually enter an exercise or an activity in the Oura app, what we do is if you say CrossFit, there's a standard compendium for like how much calories to burn for a given exercise. And it's quite extensive. They have everything in there. And so you tell us the duration, and did you feel it was low, medium, or high? And in most cases, people's rate of perceived exertion is quite good. So it's relative to your own perception, which is accurate where it should be. So if you're not truly fit and you felt, man, this kicked my ass, and the person next to you is super fit, and they're like, this was nothing. This was my recovery workout. It doesn't matter. Because if you say it's hard for you, it was hard for you. So we basically take the duration, the type of activity, and the intensity, and we do a lookup in this metabolic table and say, this is what it looked like. And we show it in the activity graph, as 5-minute averages. for that level of effort.
And that was one of the areas that I found interesting. So, for example, I just entered cross training for my activity. So, from 7 to 8 in the morning. And I put moderate because it was a more of a mobility and recovery routine than it was like one of the balls to the wall throwing kettlebells at other people in the classroom kind of workouts. But I still had a couple of bars where it said high between 7 and 8 a.m. So that's why I was interested about how it's calculating it, because I just put in moderate. So my assumption was it would just be the moderate line from 7 to 8, but it actually has a couple of peaks that are high.
Yeah, I haven't played around with that. I mean, one thing I should point out, because you mentioned it, is because we use infrared sensors in the ring, they're not turned on during the day unless you're super still, because infrared sensors, you can't take out any what's called motion artifacts. So if there's movement, the signal goes to hell, in other words. So we're just using the motion sensors mostly during the day. So having a couple of high ones, my understanding is what you put in for the manual activity overwrites anything the ring records. But I may not be understanding that correctly, and I can certainly check into that and let you know.
But so I guess then my other follow-up question to that is, even though it's measuring the level of intensity, if I'm saying moderate for 60 minutes, let's say that 40 minutes of that was really light recovery, and then 20 minutes of it was a bunch of Tabatas on the assault bike or doing sprints or whatever, it's still going to say it was 60 minutes of moderate, not 40 minutes of light and 40 minutes of high, correct?
That would be my understanding. I mean, to get that effect, you would have to specify your workout in two segments,
Right.
which is what some people do. The other thing people can do, and I should mention it here, and I think I mentioned this to you already, is if somebody still wants to use a wrist-based wearable or some other wearable to track their workouts, we now support on the iOS side the ability to import automatically workouts from Apple Health. And so if you have a wearable like Fitbit doesn't talk to Apple Health, but there are certain workarounds for wearables like that. But like a lot of other ones like the Garmin's can actually export an actual workout to Apple Health. So if you have a Garmin watch, and that's what I have, I sync it to Garmin Connect. I send it to Strava because I'm a runner, and that's where all the runners are. I then sync Strava with Apple Health, and then Apple Health then pulls it into the Oura app. So even though the ring's on my body while I'm running, it's actually overwriting that with the data it pulls from Garmin, which what they send over is the start and end time, the type of activity, in my case, running, and then how many calories I burned as they calculated off the Garmin watch.
Right. And that was if we're going to look at one stat above all that is going to be the most interesting or compelling to me when it comes to activity, it's going to be number of calories burned.
Right.
So the question that I have, let's say, and this isn't really hypothetical, this is what I was doing 2 hours ago. Let's say I'm wearing my Oura ring, I'm wearing a Fitbit Blaze, and I'm wearing a polar heart rate monitor, and I'm tracking it. I use the app iCardio. I know that there are lots of different apps, but I use iCardio from FitDigits. So of those three, if I'm doing a heavy, intense CrossFit exercise or whatever kind of training I'm doing, which one of those is going to give me the most accurate number of calories burned? I don't even need intensity levels, but just for that 60-minute period, which do you feel is going to tell me this is as close as you're going to get to the amount of energy you actually burn during that workout?
I would guess if you're moving in different planes, probably the chest strap. And the reason for that, if you're collecting the heart rate, depending how they do it, it would just purely be the calories burned for that activity. And the reason I bring this up is, I'll give an example for me. Garmin, let me compare it. So the way Oura works is, are you familiar with basal metabolic rate?
Yes.
Yeah, so we use the standard Schofield formula. So in the Oura Ring profile, you give us your age, your gender, your weight. And we use those to figure out, and we reset it at 4 a.m. local time every morning. We figure out what your basal metabolic rate is. And for your listeners, that's how many calories you would burn if you were like laying down all day long, not moving any at all. Now, we do it right off. And so we put that as your total burn for the day, and then your activity adds to that. Also, if there's any movement during the day that we don't classify as actual activity, but it's sort of background movement, that gets added to the total. So if you're looking at the numbers and they don't match up, like your basic metabolic rate and your activity rate, if the total's higher, that's because of that background movement. Garmin, on the other hand, throughout the day, they sort of mix in your basic metabolic rate. So if I go for a run, a piece of my calorie burn is part of my BMR. So that comes into Oura. That artificially inflates my calorie burn for the day a slight amount because it's building in more of my basic metabolic rate, if that makes sense.
It does, yeah, and I'm glad that you had brought up just kind of explaining what that was briefly, because I think that a lot of people will equate calorie burn with activity, but they don't realize that they burn what I mean. I think for me, my BMR is probably about 1,800. So that means that if I did nothing, if I were motionless for 24 hours, I burn almost 2,000 calories.
Right, right.
And I think that people are just so hung up on, oh, I have to move all day long. And if I need to burn all these extra calories in versus calories out, it's like you're doing a lot of the work just by being alive, just
That's
by
right.
breathing and pumping your blood. Like that's actually where most of your calorie expenditure comes in. Like, for example, it's only 11 o'clock in the morning and it's telling me that my burn for the day is already 2,550 calories.
Right, right.
And I'm assuming that that's based on the fact that I was sleeping for the first 7 hours. And then I did a relatively intense CrossFit workout from 7 to 8. And since then, I've either been coaching people where I'm standing and I'm very active and engaged, or I've been doing the podcast. So really, since I woke up at 6 in the morning, I've had 5 hours of relatively intense, moderate activity.
Right. And that's the thing is, so that the most common background calories that we take account for are the amount of extra energy over your BMR you actually burn sitting. Believe it or not, you burn extra, like working at a computer, and also standing. Just standing upright burns more calories than your BMR, background BMR. So that's a lot of the stuff that doesn't show up as activity. Once you start walking around in a room, that starts getting counted as, movement activity, calorie.
Right. Okay. So then for somebody that's super OCD like me that wants to have the best data possible, but with the most minimal amount of trackers and constantly having to stay up to date with this stuff, it seems like for all of my regular activity, the ring is covering everything.
Yep.
And you're saying that if I really am super OCD about this, which I am, that I should still be wearing the heart rate strap if I'm doing intense exercise.
Yeah, I mean, if you're really concerned right down to the fine detail of how much energy you're expending, absolutely, and especially if people that are in the sort of the gym environment where they're using different cardio machines, lifting weights and stuff. There's no easy way the ring can pick up all those activities, even close to accurate. But there is one consistent thing you can do when you're doing different things is heart rate.
Right. So you're saying that the heart rate sensors that we have in the Oura Ring are not going to be the same heart rate sensors or data that we get from a chest strap.
Well, chest strap doesn't use optical. It's a straight ECG, so it's electrical measurement. We're like extremely close to lab quality ECG. I mean, very close. The ring's been validated off our optical infrared. But again, our optical infrared, if you're doing a gym workout, they are not going to be on at all because if there's any movement, they don't turn on.
I got it. Okay. That was the piece of the puzzle that I couldn't figure out because it seemed like this thing was laboratory grade. But what you're saying is that the laboratory grade ECG is coming from the infrared, which really only happens when you're at rest and asleep.
Right. But one thing we are coming out with, I'd like to mention too, is we're coming out with a new feature called on-demand heart rate. And so with that feature, we're still finalizing what it will look like in the app, but I've been testing it. You basically hit start and it will do a countdown. And you just, as long as you stay still, it'll turn on the infrared sensors and you do, maybe a mindfulness protocol or just some standard relaxation protocol or just a spot check after you worked out. And it will measure your heart rate and heart rate variability for that session. Then you hit stop and you're done.
Oh, I like that. So that is pretty much the equivalent of putting on the chest strap for a short period of time.
Yeah. So if you do, and that's one thing that, I would like to use it for. I mean, some of the watches do this. I know the new Apple Watch 4, which I just ordered so I can test it, that a lot of people after they run, a lot of the watches, if you're still for like 3 minutes afterwards, they'll look at your recovery heart rate, which is actually a good indicator of how fit you are. So you could also do it with the Oura Ring. You go out for a run or do a workout in the gym, whatever the workout is. After you're done, you sit down, hit start on our on-demand heart rate, sit there for 5 minutes, and then stop. And you've got your what happened to your heart rate after you've finished exercising and your HRV, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, I like that. That's great. That's really, really helpful. Well, I want to be respectful of your time. I could go down this rabbit hole for, God, hours.
I could talk for hours too, believe me.
Yeah, I get that sense. I get the sense that you and I are kindred spirits for sure. But just to kind of do a super brief recap, just to make sure I understand and make sure that my audience kind of grasps this, because I think that for some people listening, they're going to be athletes like I am that are training and see the training efficacy. But I think for most people, it's just going to be, oh, wow, this thing is going to give me much more accurate sleep data. And it's going to help me understand why I feel like crap in the morning versus when I don't feel like crap in the morning. How can I apply this to the creative work that I'm doing? As far as step count is concerned, if I'm super, super OCD about the number of steps and it actually being the number of times that my foot hits the pavement, this probably isn't the best solution. However, if I'm really interested in the total calorie expenditure or the energy in general, that's the equivalent of steps, this to me seems like a better, more accurate solution than a Fitbit, so to speak. And when it comes to activity tracking, if it's just generalized activity throughout the day, it's again going to be the most accurate. But if I'm a super crazy, intense athlete, I still need to stick with the heart rate strap. Is that a fairly good summary?
Yeah, I think that's what most people. I mean, the circles I fly in tend to be mostly runners, all my friends and stuff. And it doesn't matter if we had spot on accuracy for how many miles and we could actually turn on the heart rate monitoring while you're running, they would still wear a Garmin or a Sunto or a Polar or a Fitbit or whatever. I mean, because they want the elevation gain and their splits and all that stuff. So yeah, if you're a serious athlete and you need to have the finer details, definitely the ring is then, it's an augment, it augments the Oura ring basically. And as I said, you can pull that workout right currently via Apple Health into the Oura app if you want to see the data there now.
Right. But the biggest component for me where this has been an absolute game changer is the recovery and the readiness, because that has changed my entire routine. And what I found is that by training less, I'm actually moving forwards infinitely faster. So I was just of the mindset that, I got to push harder and I'm not getting strong fast enough and I need to do another workout because of that. And then the ring taught me very, very quickly that that's not the case. So I've cut my volume by, 20 or 30%, but my gains have skyrocketed because I'm recovering more.
Right. And for me, the thing I look at, if there was only one thing I could look at, I would look at the readiness score. All the other stuff, like all the sleep details, I use those to sort of test lifestyle changes. Because if I can, alter lifestyle choices and get higher quality sleep, my readiness score goes up. But at the end of the day, I just want to have a good recovery.
Yeah, exactly. And that to me is the holy grail of all of this is there's all kinds of data and information and measurements. But like you said, if you just buy this thing and wear it for one number, just the readiness number alone, that can completely change your life and your behaviors and really give you a different viewpoint of what are the choices I'm making that are leading to the way that I feel every single day. Well, I want to be very respectful of your time. And I want to thank you so much for coming on the show and just letting me geek out and be OCD about biohacking and tracking and quantification and all this cool stuff that I probably lost everybody at about minute 7. But for those that I didn't lose with all this stuff, I hope that they are really inspired to go to the next level to track this stuff. And before I let you go, I just want to make sure that people know where to find more information about the work you're doing, because you do stuff outside of Oura as well, and then where they can find one of these rings.
Yeah, so I'll start with if you want to know anything about the Oura ring, go to ouraring.com. That's OURA ring.com. For me, the best place to go to is just Chuck Hazzard. So that's Chuck as in Charlie. Hazzard is like the Dukes of, 2 Z's.com.
Awesome. Well, I'm going to make sure to put links in the show notes to both of those. So anybody that finds the page, even if they don't listen to the show itself, they're going to have those links. But I'm tremendously grateful for the time you've given today and your expertise. And I very, very much appreciate it. So thank you so much.
Yeah. And if anybody has any questions they send you, just send them my way and I'll do my best to answer them.
I will definitely do that. Thank you so much.
All right. Take care.
Thank you for listening to episode 56 of the Optimize Yourself podcast. To access the various links and resources that were mentioned in this episode, go ahead and visit optimizeyourself.me/episode 56. And don't forget that if you use the coupon code OPTIMIZE, you can get $75 off the Oura Ring, but that code is only good until January 1st. And once again, I am not an affiliate and I'm not going to earn any commissions if you make this purchase. I simply want to help you succeed. If you enjoyed this episode, I want to remind you before you go to help support future episodes by leaving an honest review of the show in iTunes or Apple Podcasts. If you do leave a review, you're going to be entered to win a yearly subscription to Adobe Creative Cloud, an essential package of video creation tools that I personally cannot live without. Whether you're cutting your very first clip, you're creating Hollywood blockbusters such as Deadpool, or you're making critically acclaimed shows such as Atlanta or Mindhunter, Adobe has the tools that you need to bring your stories to the web, TV, or to film. What's even cooler about Creative Cloud is how easily you can move from ingest to editing, and from color grading to 3D compositing, for example, thanks to all of the smooth integration between Premiere Pro, After Effects, and Audition. To learn more about the products that Adobe Creative Cloud has to offer, visit optimizeyourself.me/Adobe. And to win yourself that yearly subscription, just leave an honest review of this show in iTunes or Apple Podcasts. And if that isn't enough to get you excited, you can also enter to win the 12-month Pro Plan from my newest sponsor, Frame.io, an amazing online collaboration tool where you can comment and interact directly with your videos, providing instant feedback online, rather than constantly going back and forth via endless email chains. And you know how I feel about email and productivity. Even cooler, your comments can be imported directly into your editing software of choice, and it is so intuitive, easy to use, and dare I say pretty, that Frame.io even won an Apple Design Award. Stop patching together your email, your Dropbox, and Vimeo and YouTube, and instead just do yourself a favor and visit optimizeyourself.me/Frame.io. And for clarification, that's Frame.io with no periods or spaces. And do not forget to leave that podcast review in iTunes to be entered to win. Thank you for listening. Be well. This episode of the Optimize Yourself podcast was made possible for you by ErgoDriven, the makers of the TopoMat, my number one recommendation for anybody interested in moving more at their height-adjustable workstation. Listen, standing desks are only great if you're standing well. Otherwise, you're constantly fighting fatigue and chronic pain. Not like any other anti-fatigue mat, the Topo is scientifically proven to help you move more throughout the day, which helps reduce discomfort and also increase your focus and productivity. I'm standing on one as I read this, and I don't go to a single job without it. And if you're smaller and you're concerned that the Topo mat is too big, or you simply don't have the floor space, there's a Topo Mini for that. To learn more, visit optimizeyourself.me/Topo. That's TOPO. This episode is also made possible for you by Sit Tight, the desk chair that has instantly become my number one recommendation if you're searching for a healthier, more ergonomically friendly office chair. Sit Tight is an active sitting chair that uses your body's natural ability to balance to activate your postural muscles. You know, those are the muscles that hurt all the time because you're slouched over a keyboard all day long. Well, using the Sit Tight causes a significant increase in your heart rate, it increases brain activity, and it causes a sensation that's similar to riding a bike, which also brings just a bit of fun into the workplace. Simply put, the Sit Tight turns sitting into an activity that actually improves your health rather than damaging it, so you can get fit while you sit. If you want to learn more about this revolutionary new desk chair that I have fallen in love with and how it can provide fitness for your body, focus for your mind, and fun for your spirit, just visit optimizeyourself.me/sittight and use the coupon code OPTIMIZE for 10% off your order.